Something was sent toward you, not dravidly, not quiet intention, a shift in tone, a glance that carried weight, manipulation wrapped in politeness, ill will disguised as indifference. You felt it move in your direction like a pressure change in the air, and for a split second your body noticed, but it didn't hit the way it used to. There was no spiral, no overanalysis, no rehearsed arguments in your head at 2 a.m. You didn't rush to defend yourself. You didn't shrink. You didn't chase clarity. You simply observed. That's when it became obvious. They can feel something changing. The hooks they once relied on aren't there anymore. The emotional doors that used to swing open now remain closed. Not locked, just uninterested. Whatever was sent your way met something unfamiliar, not resistance, not aggression, density. You didn't consciously block it. You didn't perform strength. You didn't repeat affirmations in your head. It just dissolved, and somewhere in that quiet non-reaction, a realization began forming. This isn't coincidence. This isn't luck. This isn't numbness. You didn't deflect it. You absorbed it, and it had nothing to feed on. There was a time when that same energy would have cut straight through you. You remember it. Other people's moods became your responsibility. If they were distant, you assumed you had done something wrong. If they were irritated, you searched yourself for flaws. Their silence felt like accusation. Their criticism echoed for weeks. Their rejection didn't just hurt. It rewrote your identity. You absorbed everything. A shift in tone could ruin your day. A delayed reply could unravel your confidence. Gossip felt like a verdict. Disapproval felt like exile. You over-explained because you were afraid of being misunderstood. You overgave because you thought love had to be earned. You overfelt because no one ever taught you how to filter. Back then, their spell would have worked. Not because they were powerful, but because you were open without boundaries. You internalized what was never yours. You mistook projection for truth. You treated discomfort as danger. Every negative intention found a place to land because you hadn't yet built psychological immunity. You were sensitive in a world that rewards detachment. You were sincere in rooms built on performance, and it cost you. But here's what most people don't understand about that version of you. It wasn't weakness. It was untrained depth. It was empathy without armor. It was awareness without structure. And suffering did something to you. Every betrayal forced you to question your reflexes. Every disappointment sharpened your discernment. Every time you were blamed for something that wasn't yours, your system learned slowly to pause before absorbing. You started noticing patterns. You started separating fact from projection. You started asking, is this mine to carry? That question changed everything. This isn't your final form. But it isn't you thought who was breaking you was building something invisible, a filtration system. Not walls, not coldness. A filter. And now, when something dark moves toward you, it doesn't find open wounds. It finds understanding. They haven't changed. They still gossip in low tones and call it concern. They still project their insecurities and label it honesty. They still test boundaries with subtle jokes, backhanded compliments, strategic silence. They still package envy as confidence and control as leadership. Their methods are the same. What's different is you. There was a time when their behavior would have pulled you in. You would have explained yourself, defended your name, tried to decode every shift in energy. You would have given them access to your emotions, without realizing that access was the entire point. Because that's how it works. Manipulators rely on emotional entry points. Envy feeds on visible reaction. Control depends on your nervous system responding on cue. If they can trigger you, they can study you. If they can study you, they can predict you. If they can predict you, they can steer you. But now, you listen more than you speak. You notice inconsistencies. You feel the shift in tone, but you don't rush to correct it. You let awkward silences breathe. You let people reveal themselves fully, and that unsettles them. They can feel something changing. They sense the space where your impulsive reactions used to be. They sense the absence of urgency. They sense that you're no longer trying to win them over, impress them, or defend against them. You've grown quiet, not weak, not passive. Contained. There's a difference between silence born from fear and silence born from control. Yours is deliberate. You're observing patterns instead of absorbing pressure. You're letting behavior speak instead of arguing with it. You're operating from somewhere deeper now. A place where self-trust overrides panic, where patience replaces performance, where your center isn't easily disturbed. And when they realize they can't access you the way they used to, the dynamic shifts. This is where reflection turns into confrontation. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable, because when you stop reacting, you force everything hidden into the light. What they call your aura isn't mystical. It's regulated presence. It's the way your breathing doesn't change when tension enters the room. It's how your voice stays steady when someone tries to provoke you. It's the pause before you respond, the absence of urgency, the lack of visible hunger for approval. That's not magic. That's a nervous system that learned the difference between discomfort and danger. There was a time when any shift in energy felt threatening. A delayed reply triggered anxiety. A change in tone felt like rejection. Conflict felt catastrophic. Your body reacted before your mind could reason. But healing betrayal rewired you. You learned that not every withdrawal is abandonment. Not every critique is condemnation. Not every silence is strategy. You sat with the ache long enough to realize survival didn't require performance. Isolation taught you self-sourcing. When no one showed up the way you expected, you were forced inward. You found ways to soothe yourself, to validate yourself, to stabilize without external reassurance. You stopped outsourcing your equilibrium. Rejection forced identity independence. When you weren't chosen, you had two options: collapse or define yourself. And slowly, painfully, you chose definition. You began separating who you are from how you are received. That separation created strength. Now your body doesn't leap into defense mode. It observes. You don't chase closure from people who thrive on ambiguity. You don't defend your worth to those committed to misunderstanding you. You don't over-explain your intentions to reduce someone else's insecurity. Their energy still lands. You feel it. But it finds no hook. There are no open wounds to press. No frantic need to clarify. No reflex to prove. The system they once accessed so easily is no longer available to them. That's why it feels different. You used to fight shadows. You tried to correct every false perception. You exhausted yourself battling things that weren't even solid. Now you understand light. Light doesn't argue with darkness. It reveals it. It stands, and whatever cannot coexist with it exposes itself. This is where confrontation turns into clarity. You're not untouchable because you're hardened. You're untouchable because you're regulated. What they sent wasn't power. It was exposure. The gossip revealed their insecurity. The subtle digs revealed their obsession. The passive aggression revealed how closely they monitor you. The confidence they perform so loudly revealed how fragile it actually is. When you stopped reacting, the spotlight turned, and suddenly it wasn't about you at all. It became obvious how much of their behavior depends on access to your emotions, how much of their control depends on your confusion, how much of their influence depends on your self-doubt. Without your reaction, their intention had nothing to stabilize it. It collapsed under its own instability. You didn't need to retaliate. You didn't need to confront them publicly. You didn't need to craft the perfect response. Your stillness did more than any argument could have done, because when manipulation doesn't produce movement, it exposes motive. When envy doesn't provoke insecurity, it exposes admiration twisted into resentment. When control doesn't trigger compliance, it exposes desperation. And here's the part most people never reach. Most people go back. They go back to defending, back to explaining, back to reopening wounds just to prove they're healed. They get triggered and call it passion. They relapse into reaction and call it authenticity. You didn't. You felt the old reflex rise, and you let it pass. You noticed the urge to clarify, and you stayed silent. You sensed the invitation to step back into the dynamic, and you declined without announcement. That restraint is evolution. The spell didn't fail because it was weak. It failed because you're no longer compatible with it. It showed you how far you've come, how much access you've revoked, how stable you've become in your own perception of yourself. You didn't shrink. You didn't explode. You didn't perform strength. You remained intact. And that realization shifts something deeper than validation ever could, because clarity is powerful. But what comes after clarity, when you recognize your own growth without needing witnesses, that's empowerment. The truth is, they were never the real battlefield. The real war was internal. It was your need for validation that kept you explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. It was your fear of abandonment that made you tolerate subtle disrespect. It was your addiction to proving yourself that turned every disagreement into a courtroom. It was your impulse to defend that made you exhaust yourself, trying to correct narratives that were never written in good faith. That war was brutal, not dramatic, not visible, private. Relentless. No one applauded you for the nights you chose silence over impulse. No one saw the restraint it took not to send that message. No one witnessed the moments you sat with the sting of rejection and refused to let it define you, but you fought it. Every time you paused instead of reacted, you won ground. Every time you validated yourself, instead of chasing reassurance, you reclaimed power. Every time you let someone misunderstand you without scrambling to fix it, you strengthened something deeper than pride. You dismantled the parts of you that were too available. That's why external attacks feel weaker now. Because when you win internally, external attacks lose oxygen. Manipulation needs your insecurity. Projection needs your self-doubt. Control needs your fear. And you've been confronting those shadows one by one. You faced the fear of not being chosen and realized you could still choose yourself. You faced the discomfort of being misread and survived it. You faced the silence after pulling back and discovered peace inside it. That changes a person. This version of you is harder to access. Not because you are closed off. Not because you're bitter. Because you're discerning. Not everyone evolves past reaction. Most stay in cycles, triggered, defensive, predictable. They call it personality. They call it passion. But it's pattern. You broke pattern. And breaking pattern requires depth. It requires sitting with parts of yourself you once avoided. It requires admitting where you were too dependent, too reactive, too externally defined. It requires humility and discipline. You did that work. So when something dark moves toward you now, it doesn't meet chaos. It meets someone who already survived themselves. And that is a different kind of strength. One that moves you beyond empowerment and into depth. There's a reason it doesn't land anymore. Toxic dynamics survive on very specific nutrients. Self-doubt, emotional volatility, overexposure, predictable reactions. If you question yourself loudly enough, they can step in as authority. If you react intensely enough, they can label you unstable. If you reveal everything, they can weaponize pieces of it later. If you respond the same way every time, they can script you. But you no longer provide those ingredients. You don't leak insecurity into every room. You don't flare up on command. You don't overshare to feel seen. You don't move in ways that are easy to calculate. So when manipulation hits, it collapses. It looks for an opening and finds composure. It looks for urgency and finds patience. It looks for ego and finds awareness. When envy approaches, it exposes itself. Because without your visible reaction, envy has to stand alone. It looks small. When negativity enters your field, it doesn't infect you. It gets metabolized, processed, observed, understood, released. Not because you're aggressive, because you're integrated. You've met your own jealousy, so you're not threatened by someone else's. You've confronted your own insecurity, so it doesn't echo when projected onto you. You've examined your own need for attention, so you're not seduced by shallow validation. Integration makes you stable, and stability is difficult to manipulate. They expected friction, they met stillness. They expected a spark. They met silence, they expected confusion. They met clarity. Stillness is unsettling to anyone who relies on chaos for leverage. Your calm forces them to face themselves without distraction. That's when the shift becomes undeniable. You're no longer surviving dynamics, you are outgrowing them. And depth like that doesn't just protect you, it generates power. Most people never cross this threshold, they stay reactive. Every comment pulls them. Every shift in tone controls them. They stay wounded, replaying old betrayals, expecting new ones. They stay externally defined, measuring themselves through approval, applause, or opposition. It's understandable. It's everywhere. But you didn't stay there. You used isolation as refinement. When the noise faded and the invitation slowed down, you didn't collapse into self-pity. You studied yourself. You examined your patterns. You strengthened what didn't depend on attention. You used betrayal as discernment. Instead of hardening into paranoia, you sharpened perception. You learned to read inconsistency. You learned to trust pauses. You stopped confusing intensity with sincerity. You used silence as training. While others rushed to fill space, you practiced restraint. While others reacted publicly, you processed privately. You built discipline in moments no one witnessed. That's rare, not loud power, not performative dominance. Not the kind that needs an audience. Psychological gravity. The kind that shifts a room without raising a voice. The kind that makes people measure their words more carefully around you. The kind that doesn't demand respect, but quietly assumes it. And even now, this isn't your final form. You're still evolving. But the difference is this. You're no longer evolving from survival. You're not scrambling to protect wounds. You're building from stability, from awareness, from choice. That changes the trajectory entirely. Because growth born from survival is urgent and defensive. Growth born from strength is deliberate, and deliberate power knows when to move and when to remain still. You don't have to announce your evolution. They feel it. Not because you're louder, not because you're colder, but because your patterns changed. You don't overshare anymore. Conversations don't leave you exposed. You reveal in layers now, not in floods. You understand that mystery isn't manipulation. It's self-respect. You don't chase. If someone pulls away, you let them experience the distance they created. If energy shifts, you observe before you pursue. Urgency no longer runs your decisions. You don't defend narratives about yourself. Misunderstandings aren't emergencies. False assumptions aren't fires you need to extinguish. You trust that truth stabilizes over time. That calm creates tension in insecure people. Because they're used to access, they're used to reading micro-reactions, used to decoding your facial expressions, used to triggering predictable responses and adjusting accordingly. They can't read you the way they used to, and that loss of access unsettles them. Your silence feels like exposure, as if you see more than you're saying. Your neutrality feels like superiority, even though it's just stability. Your pause feels intentional, even when it's simply regulated. When someone can't gauge where they stand with you, they're forced to confront where they stand with themselves. But you're not doing this to intimidate. You're not performing detachment. You're not playing psychological games. You're not withholding to create leverage. You're simply no longer leaking, no longer broadcasting every emotion, no longer explaining every boundary, no longer offering unlimited entry into your internal world. And when access becomes intentional, presence becomes powerful. This is controlled restraint, not suppression, not avoidance. Choice. And choice, when fully owned, becomes sovereignty. This is what your aura really is: self-trust that doesn't tremble under scrutiny, emotional regulation that doesn't spike at every provocation, boundaries that don't need announcements, observational intelligence that sees patterns before they escalate, detached compassion that understands weakness without absorbing it. It isn't mystical protection, it's integration. When something negative enters your field now, it's processed, not absorbed. You assess it. You decide whether it deserves engagement. If it doesn't, it dissolves in the space you refuse to energize. You don't fight energy anymore. You outgrow it. There's no thrill in proving people wrong. No urgency in correcting every distortion. No desire to win invisible battles. You've realized that dominance isn't force. It's stability, and stability is unshakable. They tried to provoke you and met composure. They tried to expose you and exposed themselves. They tried to access you and found distance where impulsiveness used to live. They tried to shake you. They revealed you. Because pressure doesn't destroy what's structured well. It reveals its architecture. Whatever was sent to weaken you proved you are no longer reachable from that level. Not because you're above anyone, but because you're no longer available for dynamics that require chaos. You've moved from reaction to response, from insecurity to self-definition. From survival to deliberate evolution. There's a quiet inevitability to that kind of growth. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to defend it. You don't need to perform it. It speaks in your pauses. It shows in your restraint. It radiates in your refusal to shrink or explode. You don't block darkness anymore. You transform it.